comments, and views expressed on The Kevin Smith Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the views of Kevin Smith, The Kevin Smith Show, or its affiliates or sponsors.
Hi, folks, and welcome to the Kevin Smith Show. Whoever you are, wherever you are, all around this beautiful place we call Earth, welcome to the show. And for those of you who are watching on our TV channel, chuckle a little. It's got bugs. Anyway, we're glad you're here, and I hope that you're glad you're here, and I think you will be. This is going to be a good night. Have you signed up yet for the K-Files e-zine? Look, if you're not subscribed to the K-Files e-zine, sit in front of a mirror and contemplate and ask yourself, where is the genius in not being subscribed to the K-Files e-zine? It's absolutely free. There are no strings attached, none whatsoever. You can unsubscribe anytime you desire to do so. And it will keep you informed as to what's happening with the show, in the show, for the show. Also, links to videos of interest and links to other websites of interest and stories of interest, articles. So it's absolutely free. If you haven't subscribed, be sure you go do that. It will keep you up to date, answer many of your questions that you have, and if you email me your questions, eventually I will get to answering them, but most of those are answered in the K-Files e-zine, so get your hands on it, okay? We are going to be having a Halloween party here at the Kevin Smith Show. We're going to do it online, and that means we've got a bunch of special guests lined up. Just quick cameo appearances of some special guests, people that have been on the show before, people you know and respect and love. Also, some contests and some prizes to give away, and we're going to do that on Halloween night. I've been advised not to do it Halloween night. I've been advised by a couple of folks that it would be better to do it the night before. But the night before is when I do a live show, so we will do it on Halloween night. And would love for you to get in on it. There's really not a reason not to get in on it. We've made the price $5. That is you won't find anything out there in the world that's worth much that you can get for $5. But you can by using that $5 to get your ticket to the party. It will be online. You'll be able to watch it online on our closed circuit or private TV channel. You have to have a password to get in, and you get the password when you buy the ticket. You also will get a free ebook, and you'll be hearing about that during the show tonight. So be sure you get your ticket for that. It'll be October the 31st, and I think you will enjoy what's coming. I'm pretty sure you will. All right, we tonight are going to be talking with Dr. Joseph Farrell. Dr. Joseph Farrell has written books about Nazis, and he's written books about cosmic warfare. So we're going to put the two together tonight and jump into the really deep end and ask him some questions about how the two may be related to each other. You don't want to miss this. You want to call your friends, your neighbors, your relatives, and even your enemies, and tell them to tune in. We'll be back right after this. And welcome back to the Kevin Smith Show. Just one real quick shot here. I want to see if we can get that primary camera to work. And the answer to that is no, it doesn't wish to work. All right, so we'll use the secondary camera here tonight, as we have done the past couple of nights. Don't know what the problem is. It worked all day. Now it's not. My guest is Dr. Joseph Farrell. He has been with us before, and I am pleased to say that he is with us again tonight. We have discussed in previous shows with Dr. Farrell the fact that the Nazi Party really did not go out of business at the end of World War II. And we're going to get into that again a little bit tonight. We have talked about in previous shows cosmic warfare. And tonight we're going to put the two concepts together, and I've got a few questions, and I want to hear what Dr. Farrell may have to say about them, and he will, of course, have his own thoughts and ideas about this. Dr. Farrell, welcome back to the Kevin Smith Show.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks for having me back on.
Give us a real quick rundown on this idea that you presented before about the Nazi Party in Germany did not go out of business at the end of World War II.
Well, very briefly, Kevin, I outlined that whole thesis throughout all of my Nazi books, but in particular in a book called The Nazi International. And there are two basic aspects, I think, that need to be stressed. First of all, if you look at the German surrenders, and there were two of them, in fact, one on May 7th in Reims, France, one on May 8th in Berlin itself. If you look at both of those, there is no representative of the Nazi Party that is signing on behalf of the Nazi Party or the Nazi government. All you have at those surrenders are representatives of the German military, and in particular at the last one, the three different service branches, the Reichswehr and the Luftwaffe and the Kriegsmarine. So you don't have any representative of the Nazi Party, which I have always thought very peculiar. You know, the Allies could have certainly demanded one to sign and certainly have stipulated in the surrender that the Nazi Party is signing itself out of existence as a criminal organization. But, you know, the opportunity is missed to do so. The other major thing, and I want to stress this very heavily, is that by this point in the history of the Third Reich, it is really Martin Bormann that is running the internal affairs of the Third Reich. Hitler is more or less preoccupied with trying to run the war. And it is Martin Bormann who is behind the coordination of evacuating the German science, the German patents, the technology overseas to safe havens. He has constructed a basic strategic evacuation plan. And part of that plan, in my opinion, is that he sees to it that the Allied bloc and the Soviet bloc get more or less an equal division of the spoils, but he keeps the, so to speak, the really good stuff, you know, for the Nazis themselves after the war. And as I outline in that book, there is clear evidence that the Nazis continued their most advanced secret research project under their own auspices independently after the war in Argentina for some time before, again, they move the project and then you lose all track of it. But yes, this is basically my thesis.
All right, and again, the name of the book is Nazi International, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, and this is very interesting indeed, because without getting into the details right now, I will a little bit later. I've already gotten a flash message from Australia asking some of the same questions that I intend to ask you here tonight. Once it was known who was coming and what we were going to talk about, other minds were thinking along the same track as I was thinking. All right, now, I've got here in my hands, I've got a printout of the 25 points of Hitler's Nazi Party.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to read all of these, but I will summarize some of them, and if it becomes necessary, we'll read them. But the third point here says, we demand land and territory, or colonies, for the maintenance of our people and the settlement of our surplus population. The fourth point states who can be citizens. And that fourth point says only those who are our fellow countrymen can become citizens. So no outsiders can become citizens. You could not immigrate to Nazi Germany from any other country and ever hope to become a citizen.
Right.
All right. No green card in Germany. All right. Now, the right to choose, this is point 6, the right to choose the government and determine the laws of the state shall belong only to citizens. Now, there are people that would say, well, yeah, that's the way it should be. And you know, I have to say that people who are not citizens of the United States should in no way have any part in making laws in the United States. It ought to be the citizens that make the laws. But the key point here, when we put these three together, is that we're not going to allow outsiders. You can never become a German citizen unless you were born here. We, and only we, will determine the laws, and we're looking for colonies. So we have 3 pillars of the 25, 3 of the points that give laser-like focus to a version of Germany that is going to gobble land. And they put it in writing.
Right.
Okay? Furthermore, and this is really, really interesting, here's some more things that went with this. Establishment of Social Security, strengthening of public domain laws so they can confiscate your property, state-paid education, higher education, national health care, and then PC speech. Newspapers, well, first of all, this is point 23. We demand that there be a legal campaign against those who propagate deliberate political lies and disseminate them through the press. Newspapers transgressing against the common welfare shall be suppressed. PC speech, no freedom of speech, and yet there is one of these that says all citizens shall have equal rights. Okay, so you have an equal right to agree with the government.
Right.
All right, and there's, of course, in one of these, it demands the creation of a strong central authority in the state.
Right.
Okay, so what we have here is a description of many of the things that have been going on in this country.
Yes.
And they've been going on in this country with increasing intensity and frequency since the 1950s.
Yes.
Just before the 1950s, we had Project Paperclip.
Yes, exactly.
Project Paperclip imported, what was it, 1,200 scientists?
Well, the number actually, Kevin, has really never been pinned down, and this is one of the most interesting things. But let me put it into a very broad context for you, what you've been outlining there, and I hope a context that will even kind of dovetail with the show that you did with Robert Morningstar last night. If we look at the Nazi Party itself, just take the actual official name, the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, and break it down. You have a party that is intensely nationalist. In other words, they are going to look out for Germany for Germans, okay? The second component, of course, is the socialist part. They are going to implement all sorts of socialist policies within that nation. In other words, it's not an international socialism like communism, it's a national socialism. And finally, we're going to take care of the workers. So in spite of the barbarity of the regime, once Hitler takes power, one of the first people that he takes aim at is the Anglo-American corporate elite that basically had been sucking Germany dry, you know, through the Dawes Plan, the Young Plan, and so on and so forth in between the wars. And one of the first things he does, and I hope this is a point that your listenership will take to heart, because Nazi Germany implemented 2 major policies. and it's very crucial for people to understand how they dovetail together. The first policy is that Hitler essentially restored the sovereign right to the German government to issue essentially debt-free money. In other words, he bypassed central bankers completely. There's two forms of money. Basically, money as debt, which is monetized debt, which is the system that most countries have been operating under, and you know that certainly this country has been operating under the Federal Reserve. The other thing that Hitler does is he starts very secret departments within the SS to make Germany energy independent. This is where all their interest and research in some of this very exotic physics begins. And it's important to understand that these two policies go together. They go hand in hand as far as the Nazis are concerned. They have correctly seen that if you're going to be free of an international private banking elite, on the one hand, you have to destroy their monopoly over currency, and on the other, you have to destroy their monopoly over energy. In other words, you have to develop energy sources entirely free of this non-renewable resource game that those bankers play. So this is very crucial. Nazi Germany was taking direct aim at the international power structures at that time. Now, the tie-in to Kennedy and Paperclip is this. At the close towards the end of the war, and I've written about this in the SS Brotherhood of the Bell, there is, of course, that very interesting private deal that is struck between Allen Dulles, who was the station chief of the OSS in Zurich, Switzerland at the time, and General Reinhard Gehlen, who was the chief of German military intelligence on the Eastern Front. Pardon me. Gehlen basically worked out a deal whereby he would turn over to the United States that entire German military intelligence network in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. That, of course, the OSS then later becomes the CIA. So in other words, what I'm telling you, Kevin, is that for all intentions and purposes, the entire operational and even to a certain extent analytical Soviet desk at the CIA was a front for a house of Nazi spies, and the civilian charter and character of the CIA was already compromised 2 years before President Truman signs the National Security Act of 1947 into law.
Plus, there is this. Gehlen, in this agreement to do this, agreed to do it so long as he got to remain in command of it.
Exactly. Gehlen was in the day-to-day operational control of this network. So in other words, what you have at that instant is the creation of a kind of international power structure for this Nazi organization. And let me be very clear once again, Martin Bormann is sitting on top of all of this. Think of Martin Bormann as Dick Cheney, and think of him as Dick Cheney without the warmth and charm. In other words, this guy is a real piece of work, all right? Now, the final thing I want to mention with respect to the Kennedy assassination is that Dulles, of course, was a director of the CIA. He was very aware of this whole Nazi network. When he was fired by Kennedy, if you look at what Kennedy is taking aim at with his directive to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces and so on and so forth, he is taking direct aim at one of the fiefdoms of power that the Nazis had established themselves in after the war. So you have, in addition to all the things that Mr. Morningstar on your show outlined last night, another group that is certainly a player in the assassination and that has a major interest in seeing President Kennedy taken out is, of course, this international structure of Nazis. And dig and sniff long enough in the Kennedy assassination, and you will find ultimately these international fascists and Nazis popping up all over the place. This is what so perplexed Jim Garrison, and he really didn't even know what to make of it, but the story is very clear, and you're correct. The policies that we see going on in this country right now are clearly fascist. And they have been for some time. So if you want to pursue that coup d'etat angle a bit more, the scenario that is being set up is very, very frightening.
Well, before we do proceed, I want to make sure that everybody understands upon what basis I proceed.
Sure.
I am apolitical. I do not give a tinker's damn about Republicans. I do not give a tinker's damn about Democrats. I am an American, and I am loyal to the Constitution. And the show is not about politics. However, there are players that are highly political, that are doing things and have done things related to UFOs.
Right.
And because of that, we have to look, if I don't want to sound crude, but it's really pretty simple. If you look under the skirt, you see everything that's under the skirt.
Right.
And that is the situation here. So I just wanted to point out these policies of the Nazi Party, because I think, and this is the reason, I think whenever I read as I have, and paraphrase as I have, these policies of the Nazi Party, this is what they wrote. These are their 25 points.
Right.
Okay? So, this is their program. Now, when I read this, and you hear it, folks, and then you sit back and you remember the headlines for the past few months and hopefully for the past several years, and you remember the headlines and you go, oh my gosh, that sounds like what I've been hearing.
Yes.
That is exactly the point. The point being that if the Nazis did not go out of business, then we certainly have some evidence in front of our eyes that should tell us they may still be not only in business but active and fairly successful right here in the United States. And it has an impact on this whole topic of UFOs. We'll be getting into that. We have to take a break, and we'll be back right after this. We're talking with Dr. Joseph Farrell. We're talking about the concept that the Nazis did not go out of business. And I said it plays prominently if this can be established. And I think, by the way, you make an excellent case for it. But so do the headlines all across our newspaper since the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
And the trend, just watch the trend since the 50s in the United States of America and see, are you headed towards more freedom? So you put that together with the documentation that you, Dr. Farrell, have provided, and you make an excellent case here. But I want to go to NASA and one Mr. Werner von Braun.
Sure.
Highly respected, highly loved by the American people. And although, and I remember this coming up about him being a former Nazi. I remember this coming up when I was a kid.
Too.
And it was downplayed. They said, well, if you didn't go along with Hitler, you got shot. And so almost all the scientists, had to play along, and they all were Nazis. And but he was not really a very ardent Nazi. Well, the fact is, he was an officer in the SS.
That's right.
And if I may be mistaken, but I think he was a major. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, a major is not that's not a small rank.
No.
You're only a couple of steps away from general.
That's right.
And his file was shown on television the other night, a report after the war. The report said that he was an ardent Nazi, and somebody in Washington put it in a typewriter, went above the line where it says that he is an ardent Nazi, and right above that they put the word not. He is not. So it's above the line, and it was inserted, He was an ardent Nazi, and he was not the only one.
No, that's correct. In fact, as a matter of fact, it's very interesting that you mentioned that. I just received yesterday in the mail a file on another paperclip scientist that was a close associate of Dr. von Braun, a fellow by the name of Dr. Kurt Davis, that I see the same thing. I read his file last night, and this happens over and over again in the file, that one of the major concerns that they had with this man was that he was an ardent Nazi, and it's very clear from reading the file that they have doctored his past, and in fact, it's clear to me from reading the file that certain things in his party record, in his SS record, and so on, were simply expunged before the war's end by the Nazis themselves. So again, I think you're absolutely right to point out that at least as far as NASA goes, that there is this very tight, and in fact, I want to mention something in addition to this. One of the early security concerns that I've discovered in my research that I'm doing now for a book I'm writing now is that our counterintelligence was simply, to put it bluntly, shoddy with respect to these Nazis. They were given more or less free rein, and we discovered that they were buying these Mercedes cars on these little government salaries. So in other words, they're getting money from somewhere. And we also discovered that they had a more or less intact internal chain of command amongst themselves. So in other words, they're acting more or less as a quasi-independent group inside of the United States, inside the space program, the ballistic missiles programs, and so on and so forth, to the point, Kevin, that they were more or less in total control of those V-2 launches that were taking place in Texas and New Mexico after the war, even to the point of sending up nose cones with cameras. And when our people went out to find these camera films, after these nose cones would come back down on parachutes, they were missing. So in other words, it looks to me, Kevin, as if they were using this program to do a little bit of covert spying on us, and passing it along to their higher-ups in this international Nazi organization. So yeah, the penetration of these people into, as I've been discovering in the research I'm conducting now, into the post-war American military-industrial complex is just absolutely stunning. It boggles the mind, Kevin, when you actually sit down and see who went where and what they were doing. It's just absolutely mind-boggling.
There was always, after the war, there was always speculation that Hitler did not really die.
Yes.
And I don't know what to think about that, because I've seen very convincing documentaries that say he did, and here's why we know he did. I've seen very convincing documentaries that say he didn't, and here's why we can say that he didn't. I don't know, but Hitler was never the story. Hitler, no, he was the puppet out front.
He was in a certain sense the front man, and as I've indicated, it's really Martin Bormann who is controlling even all access to Hitler for a considerable period in the final years of the war. So the one you have to look at is Bormann. But let me go to the Hitler story briefly. I was just on Coast to Coast this last Saturday night talking about the fact that recent DNA tests on the skull that supposedly is Hitler's, that the Soviets have had for a number of years, has turned up to show that this skull is actually that of a woman under 40 years of age. Now, it's very interesting that this has come to light so very recently, because in the Nazi International, as you know, I detail a case that Hitler actually probably did get out of Berlin at the end of the war through the machinations of Martin Bormann and his good friend Heinrich Müller, who actually headed the Gestapo and who controlled all the doubles for the leaders of the Nazi Party. And the thing we have to remember in the case of Hitler and these top-ranking Nazis and the stories of their death that we have been told, and that is that all of these stories are themselves ultimately dependent upon Nazi witnesses. So in other words, even in the case of Hitler, we're dealing with a story that we have been told and that was more or less adopted by Trevor Roper and British intelligence at the end of the war, a story that has been told to us by a bunch of Nazis. So this is the reason I think that we have to view these stories of their deaths with extreme skepticism, because in any court of law, these witnesses, of course, would be impeached character witnesses. And to me, I've always found it very difficult to believe these stories simply because the Allied propaganda during the war is that these people are a bunch of inveterate liars. And then all of a sudden, at the end of the war, we believe them. Now, to a certain extent, there's a psychological necessity. Everybody needed Hitler to be dead at the end of that war. But the fact of the matter is, I think that you can make an excellent case, especially if you talk to the Argentinians down in Argentina. They will tell you to this day that there's a certain region of the country that Hitler and these high leaders of the Nazi Party ensconced themselves in after the war. So we have to drop our Anglo-American centrism of the history of the war and start talking to everybody that was a participant in the war, the Argentinians, the French, the Russians. And if you start doing that, most of those sources, most of those people will tell you a very different version of the end of the war than what we've been taught.
Gee, I'm shocked.
Well, you know, one of the most interesting investigators into the whole Hitler survival story was, in fact, a policeman like yourself. And the fellow's name was Harvey Wilson, and he published an article about the Hitler's survival in this area of Argentina in the Police Gazette in 1964, and I reproduced the article in the Nazi International. So, you know, the way it looks to me, Kevin, is that Nazism survived, and by survival I want to stress that I mean it survived in more than just the case of just a few of these Nazi leaders in little hideouts and enclaves. They survived with an organization, they survived with an independent security service, they survived with a political agenda, which they certainly put into place after the war. You find Nazi sponsorship of many of these radical Muslim cells in the Middle East. You find Nazis involved in the overthrow of King Farouk in Egypt, working on behalf of the CIA, but also in behalf of their own agenda in bringing Gamal Abdel Nasser into power in that country. You even have Nazis involved in getting him to throw the Americans and British out of Egypt and to bring in the Soviets. So, when you get to that point, you really have to question the sanity of these post-war Allied and Soviet powers.
All right, now this brings up an interesting question. I don't know if you've researched this part of it. Mm-hmm. Only way to know is to ask. So here we go. At the end of the war, mm-hmm. you have Martin Bormann divvying up patents and trinkets of science.
Right.
Some of it going to the Russians, some of it going to the Allies.
Right.
Both the Russians and the Allies were enemies of Germany. Now, I know the Russians at one time were allies with Germany.
Right.
And in fact, for a while, there was some question about which side the U.S. would come down on.
Right.
And but anyway, here they are divvying up the science to former enemies.
Right.
Divvying up the scientists, because as we had Project Paperclip, a bunch of those scientists were taken to the Soviet Union as well.
Right.
And we got a bunch, they got a bunch. And now we have the Nazis that are escaped, or some of them perhaps living in the U.S., therefore in relative freedom, orchestrating both the Soviet and the U.S. against each other.
Right.
Looks to me like they won the war.
Well, in a certain sense, I think you can actually argue that case, and I'm glad that you brought up the idea of orchestrating the Cold War, because it has been pointed out by numerous people that Galen's organization was heavily penetrated by the NKVD, which of course later became the KGB in the Soviet Union. And it's also been pointed out that Galen's first estimates of Soviet military capabilities and intentions after the war were done deliberately to get us into an arms race. Now, here's the thing I want to point out that these people miss. Anytime you're dealing with double agents, you're dealing with people whose loyalty is questionable. So it looks to me that what Galen is actually doing is he's allowing some of his own people supposedly to be turned by the KGB so that he can literally do the same thing with the Soviet Union and feed them a bunch of disinformation about our military capabilities and intentions and get them locked into an arms race. So in other words, my point is that with the Galen organization, which incidentally later becomes the nucleus for West German intelligence, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, and that in turn becomes the nucleus for NATO intelligence. There's a key right there. What it looks to me as is that you have a deliberate long-term plan being orchestrated during and set up during the war by these Nazis to make sure that the East and West get locked into this arms race so that you have maneuvering room for Germany and for what one of Martin Bormann's primary principal post-war goals is.
And we'll have to find out what that is when we come back from break. We'll be back, folks, right after this. Welcome back. I'm Kevin Smith. My guest this evening is Dr. Joseph Farrell. Dr. Farrell, you were about to make a point of Martin Bormann's most focused goal for after the war. What was that?
Well, yeah, believe it or not, and here it comes. One of his principal goals after the war was to create a European federation which Germany would be able to dominate, and these are his words now, by elastic political means. So what do we have right now in Europe? We have precisely a European Union, a European federation. And who are the two countries that dominate it? Well, France, of course, and guess who? Germany. So, in other words, all of the agendas of this post-war Nazi international have, in fact, come about. And, if we look at this international Nazi organization, it would take an organization of international extent to pull off something like that, and that's exactly what I'm arguing.
All right, now I want us to tie this to UFOs, and here's how. We've established, I think, I think you would agree that what we've done here in laying out the continued existence of the Nazis is pretty much like skipping stones on the water. There's a great deal more material that people need to take a look at, but I think we've established some of the documentation for the existence of a continued Nazi party.
Right.
One of the things that you told us is that not only did they continue to exist after the war, but they existed with an intact command structure.
Yes.
And with various intact institutions within their organization.
Yes.
You also told us they saved the best goodies for themselves in terms of the science. Now, they were working on, at the end of the war, what we would call saucer-type aircraft.
Yes.
There are people that say they successfully flew them. There are people that say they didn't.
Right.
But we know for sure they were working on them.
Yes.
Yet the Soviet Union went heavily into rocket technology.
Yes.
So did the United States of America.
Yes.
Is it, and at the same time, the largest number of the most spectacular UFO sightings seems to be South America, where
yes.
these Nazi enclaves were, and to this day, there still are some Nazi
yes.
enclaves.
Oh, yes, definitely, definitely.
Is it possible that this is what happened?
Oh, yes.
Now, let me lay the scenario out.
Mm-hmm.
We've already talked about the possible scenario of them orchestrating the Cold War.
Yes.
They've got scientists that went to the Soviet Union. They've got scientists that went to the United States, and they all still seem to be answering to some central command structure.
Yes.
Okay. So here in the United States, those scientists directed technology towards rocket technology.
Yes.
Over in the Soviet Union, they were directed towards rocket technology, while down in Argentina, they were building UFOs. Is that a possibility?
Well, to be very blunt in my answer, yes, because the project that I lay out that is going on in Argentina, that I lay out in the Nazi International, is precisely a continuation of their most advanced secret research project, which was called the Bell, and we've talked about that on your show.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1951, that project is shut down, ostensibly by Juan Perón, but if you read what I lay out in the Nazi International, it's very clear that the man who headed up that project, a Nazi scientist by the name of Dr. Ronald Richter, that it's very clear that he is under orders, basically, to make his project look ridiculous and foolish and fraudulent so that they can shut it down and move it elsewhere. And that's exactly what I believe happened. We don't know where it moved to, but we do know from the evidence that the Nazis were continuing all of their most advanced research into free energy, into field propulsion, and into the acquisition of what for them was the ultimate weapon. And I want to stress something here. In my books, I have outlined what I believe to be a fairly convincing prima facie case that the Nazi atom bomb project was successful. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because that project was not even classified by the Nazis at the highest level. The project that was classified at that level was precisely this Bell project. So in other words, yes, your scenario, I think, makes a lot of sense. It looks to me that somebody, and probably this Nazi International, has continued research in Latin America with all of their vast funding through their penetration of the Latin American drug trade and so on and so forth, that they have continued funding this research and development of this very exotic physics that the Nazis were pursuing for a very long period after the war. And once you have said that, once you've admitted that, while they have us building rockets and the Soviets building rockets, this means that essentially they have put themselves or maneuvered themselves into the position to be able to develop a technology that is wildly more capable than anything that chemical rockets will ever be capable of in terms of its potential interplanetary significance.
Okay, now we're approaching the cosmic war.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
You see, my devious mind has been working on these points since our last two shows. All right, here we go. They've got what we would call UFO technology. There are rumors that they may have had extraterrestrial contact in the beginning that helped them to get started. Mm-hmm. But then when they weaponized the craft that they built, they lost extraterrestrial help. Mm-hmm. If they have continued now to develop these in South America and have developed, in fact, technological superiority over what the U.S. has and over what Russia has, mm-hmm. and if they, in fact, now have the ability to fly between the stars, mm-hmm. this cosmic war that you have talked about could be restarted, could be resparked, could it not?
Well, oh boy, yeah. Let me talk to a number of points that you've raised there. First of all, I do not believe, or I am not an adherent, that the Nazis made any genuine extraterrestrial contact, because as you pointed out in your remarks, these are rumors. Mm-hmm. Rumors themselves are not substantiated. In fact, the people putting them out are a group of post-war neo-Nazis.
Well, and one of the key people, I can't think of his name, wrote a series of pro-Nazi novels.
Oh yes, that fellow by the name of Wilhelm Landisch.
That's it.
I cite his stuff at great length in the Nazi International, as a matter of fact. But let's look at this cosmic war scenario and this idea that a space war may be starting again, because if you've been following the recent work of Richard Hoagland, it is very clear that there is some sort of covert war going on upstairs. We've had in recent years a comet that blew up for no apparent good reason, and of course there's no good physical model that can explain why a comet would blow up on the basis of natural causes, all right? The other thing we've had happen in recent years is two satellites, a Russian and American satellite, slamming into each other. You know, and neither Russia nor America would permit any of their satellites to be manipulated into that position. So somebody... And
we've got several organizations, both in Russia and here, that are tracking everything in space down to 4 inches in size.
Exactly.
And when they say they didn't see this coming, that they need to go tell that at Disneyland.
Exactly. They saw it coming, but the point is there was nothing they could do about it. This means that there is another group in play that has their hands on the technology to do this. And the only group that we can find in the historical record that would even remotely approach an interest, or that has shown an interest in having possession of that sort of physics, of that sort of technology, is precisely the Nazis, all right? The final thing that we've got to consider, and Richard Hoagland was on Coast to Coast last night speaking precisely to this point during the last hour, was this upcoming NASA mission where we're going to be crashing things into the south pole of the moon.
All right, we'll pick up there when we come back. We have to take a break. We'll be back, folks, right after this. All right, welcome back to the Kevin Smith Show. My guest is Dr. Joseph Farrell. Dr. Farrell, I had to cut you off in mid-sentence. The floor is yours.
Well, essentially, I was getting to the Nazi connection with this cosmic war, and incidentally, let me thank you for making that connection, because you've seen how I write my books. You're connecting dots between them, and I give little clues on how to connect those dots in the book, so you know you're dead on here. What I lay out in the Cosmic War book is essentially a scenario that if we look at some of these very, very ancient texts, not so much as mythological texts or even as philosophical texts, but as texts containing a physics, if you know how to decode it, then what you have contained in them are little clues as to perhaps how to reconstruct that physics. Now, the Nazis enter that picture very specifically in a very clearly related way, because as most people know, the Nazi government, under the auspices of the SS, had created a whole department of the SS called the Ahnenerbendienst, the so-called Ancestral Research Bureau. But here's the key that most people miss. When Himmler set this up, and you can go to the Nuremberg Tribunal records and kind of dig around a little bit, and you'll eventually find this letter, this decree, that establishes this department. When he sets this up, he says that one of the purposes of the Ahnenerbe is to investigate the esoteric and the occult for its potential military application. So when you have all of these Nazi archaeological teams going around the world, and specifically and importantly to Mesopotamia, one of the things they're interested in, covertly but very clearly, is to acquire these texts or anything else that would give them a clue into this ancient lost physics that, if you read those ancient texts carefully, was the technology, was the science behind what I believe to have been a very genuine, very interplanetary war that was fought by means of it. So if you're looking at that explosion of technology that took place during the 12 years of the existence of the Third Reich, I don't think you need to rationalize it on the basis of having contact with extraterrestrials. I think where you need to look is this whole interest in ancient lore, occult tradition, and some of these ancient texts. There's your Nazi connection to the Cosmic War.
Okay, now you mentioned earlier that we had two satellites that crashed into
Yes.
each other very mysteriously, and the explanations, they could have just said no, they didn't really crash, those were flares being dropped. That would have been
Right.
just as sensible.
Yeah, swamp gas.
Yeah, it's swamp gas. But here we also have something, and that's two important satellites that went missing.
Yes.
One of them is the Mars Global Surveyor.
Yes.
All right, now the Mars Global Surveyor has never been explained. It just went away.
Yep.
It didn't blow up, as some people have suggested, because had it done so, there would be debris.
Right.
There was no debris in its orbit, and as confirmed by the other satellite, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, using its high-resolution camera.
Right.
They were looking for it. They couldn't find it.
Yes.
Okay, it just went missing. All right,
Yep.
now, then at the end of August, first part of September, we had the Chandrayaan-1 in orbit, the Indian satellite, in orbit around the moon. It was doing high-resolution 3D mapping. And it really got some good shots of what was on the moon. But another thing that it did was it confirmed that there is water on the moon.
Yes.
All right, now just after that confirmation, and before that confirmation was released to the public, it went missing. And here's what's interesting about this, Dr. Farrell. The first report that came out quoted a Mr. S. Satish of the Indian Space Agency
Yes.
as saying it vanished from radar. That's a quote. It
Yes.
vanished from radar. Within 2 days, that article had been pulled,
Yes.
and new articles have been put out that say we lost radio contact. But that isn't what he said originally. He said it vanished from radar, and we are going to ask the Russians and the Americans if they can locate it, because they have some really super strong radar. Okay?
Right.
So
Right.
now they're saying they just lost radio contact. If something vanishes from radar, that's not the same thing as losing radio contact.
That's right.
And what happened is that satellite, apparently, according to Satish, just went missing.
Well, let me speak to Mars first, and then to the Indian satellite, and in the latter respect, I'm going to kind of play off of the remarks that Hoagland made on Coast to Coast last night. But with respect to Mars, there's even more strange stuff going on Mars, and I mean right on the planet itself. Because a few months back, I forget how long ago it was, NASA was concerned that the little robot that we have running around up there was beginning, nearing the end of its life expectancy. And one of the reasons that the concern had been expressed was because the dust that was settling on its solar panels, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then all of a sudden, this little robot simply turned itself off. They lost contact with it. And then, all of a sudden, it turned itself back on. And lo and behold, the solar panels were clean. It was as if some little Martian came by with his little bottle of Windex and cleaned off the solar panels for us on our little robot. So in other words, if we look at what's happening, someone appears to be sending us messages. If we put all of these anomalies together, the crashing satellites, the comet that blows up, robots that turn off and turn back on with, solar panels free of dust, and so on and so forth. If we look at all of this, Kevin, it looks as if someone is trying to send us messages, and namely that we are here on these planetary bodies in your solar system, and we have a technology that you do not possess. And let me add one more thing to that scenario. I think if we look at the actions of the Anglo-American corporate elite in the last few years, they are acting increasingly panicked. They are acting like people with the gun to their head. I think it actually began with September 11th and the collapse of the two World Trade Center towers, because I think what is the message that is being sent by somebody, and I think it's somebody right here on good old planet Earth, is that we have our hands on an extremely sophisticated technology and you don't. Now this brings up the moon and the Indian satellite. The loss of radar contact, the utter absence of this satellite, would indicate to me that whoever was behind that, and I am very insistent that there was probably somebody behind it. Again, it's part of the same message pattern that is being sent to these rocket-based technological powers that have committed themselves essentially to a physics and technology that basically is designed to dead end. Someone is sending them messages that they have their hands on a technology that is vastly more sophisticated and much more capable and of a genuine interplanetary capability. Now, if we go to what Richard said on Coast last night, I mention it for your listeners because it's directly of interest to this scenario that you're sketching out. And that is that the discovery of water on the moon is also dovetailing with another discovery that Indian satellite made, and that is the presence of an extremely paper-thin atmosphere on the moon that was not there during the Apollo missions and the space probes, the unmanned space probes of the 1960s. So in other words, what we have with the presence, the detection by the Indians of the detection now of a very, very, very thin atmosphere on the moon means that this is the product of a technological activity. Somebody is there, and somebody doesn't want anyone to know that they're there. So if we go back now to what I've been saying all along, in the historical record, the only people with an interest in this kind of advanced sort of field propulsion physics that have had that interest since the 1930s, if not before, and that have been pumping money and covert projects and personnel into the development of that stuff are the Nazis. And the only people with an historically verifiable track record of post-war existence, of post-war organization, and of a post-war pursuit of research projects in that area that could represent an independent power that is not represented by the United States, Russia, India, China, Japan, or the European Space Agency with their rockets is precisely this Nazi international.
All right, tell you what I want to do. I'm going to go ahead and open up the phone lines. I've got some more questions, but we'll invite our audience to join us. And the telephone numbers, ladies and gentlemen, are 623-444-5889. Or if you need to call me toll free, please feel free to do so at 888-223-4599. So if you have a question or if you have a comment for Dr. Joseph Farrell, those are the numbers to call. As always, if you live outside of the USA and you live outside of Canada, you don't want to make the international long-distance call, no problem. All you have to do is go to my website, kevinsmithshow.com, scroll down, and you'll see a link that says Flash Message. All right, let's go to the telephone. Caller, you're live on the Kevin Smith Show. Your first name and from where are you calling?
Hey, Kevin in North Carolina.
Hi, Kevin.
Another one out of the park tonight, Kevin.
Well, I'll tell you what, anytime you have Joseph Farrell on the show, it's home run time.
I wish I had half your energy, Dr. Farrell, all the books you've come out with. Okay,
well,
Mike, go ahead.
It can be exhausting, let me tell you.
I can't imagine how you keep up. Coming from the idea of the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right.
I'm one of those people that reads very slowly, so there's no way I've made it through all your books. So forgive my ignorance here. But if I'm trying to follow what we're saying, what you said earlier in the show, is that the Nazis basically took down the global banking cartel of the day.
Right.
So are they still at war with that cartel, or, the Illuminati, or whatever you want to call them, or have they replaced them?
What a wonderful question. No. I have a new book coming out next spring from Farrell House called Babylon's Banksters, but let me kind of answer that question by setting up this scenario. If you look at the Bilderberger group and who is involved at the very initial founding and those early meetings, you'll discover something very peculiar. The founder, of course, is Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, along with David and Lawrence Rockefeller. But Bernhard is an SS officer. So if we assume now the existence of an intact post-war Nazi international organization with its own chain of command, as an SS officer, he's answering ultimately to Martin Bormann. Okay? Now, Martin Bormann, in turn, is the financial genius of the Third Reich, bar none. And he is sitting on top of an enormous pile of liquid and hard assets that he has to launder, and the only people to launder them are in London and New York. Okay? So if you look at some of the early attendees at those early Bilderberger meetings, one of them is precisely Dr. Hermann Josef Abs, who is the chairman and CEO of Deutsche Bank. Okay? So it looks to me that what you have with those Bilderberger meetings is a covert détente deal that is being struck by this post-war Nazi international and its chief rival, private rival for power, that Anglo-American corporate elite, to move all of that money, to launder it through those big, huge London and New York banks, all right? Now, you mentioned 9/11. And I want people to look at the symbolism of the two World Trade Center towers, and follow me very carefully here. Because what I believe happened on 9/11 was an operation within an operation within an operation. In other words, I don't believe that the 9/11 truthers are looking deeply or long enough, okay? I don't believe that demolitions or nanothermite or mini nukes or any of the other claptrap and nonsense that you've heard out there can explain the physical signatures that you see happening when those towers come down, because quite literally they are being turned to dust. To do that with controlled demolitions, you would have had to pack those buildings with so much explosives that it would have been very difficult to do, especially under everybody's noses. What you're seeing there is a technology being displayed. Now look at the symbolism of what those two towers represent. Number one, they represent the headquarters, so to speak, the symbols of the center of that Anglo-American corporate financial power. That's the first thing. But the second thing, and what people miss, is that those two towers also represent the twin Masonic pillars, Jachin and Boaz. In other words, they are visible representations of that other power that is so closely intertwined with that Anglo-American financial elite, namely Freemasonry. All right? So whenever someone strikes at those towers in the way that they were struck, that is a clear strike against the symbolism of that Anglo-American corporate elite. And the strike is with a technology that that elite does not possess. That's why they are panicked. And it's also, furthermore, my belief that this recent financial panic that you see in that very same circle is part of this very covert warfare that's going on upstairs, that's going on down here. Somebody has these people panicked, absolutely spitless. They are running around, scrambling madly to make sure that their own energy supplies in the Middle East are secure. So yeah, that's kind of the scenario I'm working with right now. Excellent question.
Question would be, okay, if they are the enemy of the global elite, which most people would, I guess most of the, shall I say, the conspiracy theory crowd is afraid of, and if I follow what you're saying, they're saying that, they're crashing the economy to take care of us, and you're suggesting, no, the Nazis are crashing their economy and they're panicking. So now the follow-up question would be, who should I be more afraid of?
Well, in my opinion, you need to be, another excellent question, in my opinion, you need to be more afraid of this international fascist or Nazi organization than you'd need to be afraid of the Anglo-American corporate elite. Because, as I've said on other shows and numerous interviews, numerous times, they are not in the position. I mean, they have literally pissed off the whole world. They've got the Russians mad at them, the Chinese, the Japanese. I mean, my word, look at the recent elections in Japan. They literally kicked out the ruling party that's been more or less the puppet of that Anglo-American financial elite ever since the end of the war. So they have made a lot of enemies. So they are not going to crash the economy of their only secure basis of power, which namely is in North America, because they need to keep that intact. In other words, you are looking at factional infighting, so to speak, within this New World Order crowd. They are not going to crash their own basis of power, because then they are really going to be backed into a corner. So it's looking to me as if their schemes are coming unraveled in a breathtaking way. And I like to go back to the end of the war and to my scenario of what I think the Bilderbergers were really set up to do, and that was move all this Nazi money around. And that is, and here's the bad news, David and Sir Edmund. The bad news is when you're playing with the likes of Martin Bormann and Heinrich Gestapo Miller, that money is going to come with a very high price tag, and when the day comes, when the marker comes due, you'd better be able to pay up, because if not, they will take you out. You're dealing with people that are mafiosi to the nth power. So, in other words, it's looking to me like in recent years, that post-war détente is coming unraveled. And it's looking to me as if you're seeing the beginning of some real factional infighting with who's going to be on top of that emerging world order when it finally does happen. And I think the Anglo-American elite is under the gun. They are under severe pressure.
I need a playbill. This is more involved than the movie Dune, I think.
Oh, yeah, very, very much so. I make no bones about that either. You're absolutely right.
And I don't want to monopolize. I'm going to get out of here, but I do want to ask, if you can, before the end of the show, maybe you can connect it back around and tell us who the original aliens were that they got this technology, and are they still around, and are they in on this game at any point? So,
I can answer that very easily with this expression. If we are to credit the ancient Sumerian, the ancient biblical, and the ancient Egyptian texts, or for that matter, even the ancient Hindu texts, that at some point there was a contact with Anunnaki, or with Nephilim, or with gods, whatever you want to call it, and if that contact involved the interbreeding, that means there has to be, by the laws of genetics, enough similarity between whoever they were and whoever we were at the time in order for that to work. So let me put it very bluntly. They are our genetic cousins. They are, so to speak, of the genus Homo sapiens. And they may be another species, like we're Homo sapiens sapiens. Within that genus, they are probably some related species. Okay, that's it in a nutshell.
All right, Kevin, thanks for the call.
Excellent question.
Very, very good. 623-444-5889. That's the number, or 888-223-4599. That's the toll-free number. All right, from Colombia, I've got a flash message. Let's take this call, and we'll do the Colombia flash message after the break. Caller, you are live on the air. Your first name and from where are you calling?
Stefan from Quebec City, Kevin.
Hi, Stefan.
Dr. Farrell, I have to admit I'm a bit confused, and I'm going to ask a humdinger of a question here.
Sure.
I was always under the impression that the Nazi Party was against the Jewish people in general, right?
Yes.
So if they're the ruling elite of the planet, shouldn't it also come to pass that the Germans themselves would be the elite of the planet, that they would be in the top positions?
Well, that's always been a part of Nazi ideology, and in fact, I think I've alluded, and I take the meaning of your question, and I'll address that in a moment, but I think I've already alluded to the fact that if you look at the structure of the European Union very, very carefully and see who is the dominant role-playing nations in it, it boils down essentially to two, and that's France and Germany. Germany in particular, if you look at the moves that Germany has made in Eastern Europe since the reunification, it is absolutely mind-boggling how deeply, deeply they have penetrated and how very influential they are.
Okay, we'll get the rest of that answer after this break that's just about to take over. And Stefan, do you want to hang on until after the break?
Oh, I sure do.
All right, hang in there. We'll be back, folks, right after this. All right, welcome back to the Kevin Smith Show. We're talking with Dr. Joseph Farrell, and the question under consideration at the moment is, since the Jews were the targets of the Nazis, and because they were sort of the ruling elite, and well, wouldn't that mean that the Nazis would become the ruling elite? And Dr. Farrell, you were answering that, so have at it.
Well, the other thing I want to mention to Stefan, and I think I sense what his confusion here may be, and that is the détente that I mentioned that was struck at the Bilderberg initial Bilderberg meetings. If you go back, Stefan, to World War II, the biggest dirty secret of the war is that there was a very, very covert and quiet cooperation between the RSHA, the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, which was basically their national security agency under the SS, and Zionism. Now, that's one of the biggest, darkest, dirtiest secrets of the war. You really have to dig to find it, but let me give you a couple books that you can go to start researching that topic if you're interested in it. One of them is a book. One of them is an excellent book by a fellow by the name of Christopher Simpson, and the title of the book is called Blowback. He details in there how the Gestapo actually helped train some of the Palestinian Jewish cells to commit acts of terrorism against the British mandate. Okay, and the fellow's name that was in charge of the Zionist end of that was a fellow by the name of Fievel Polkus. Okay, the German end of that would have been coordinated by none other than, sit down, have a strong swig of coffee on this one, than Reinhard Heydrich. Okay, the other book that you need to look at is a book by a Jewish playwright by the name of Benjamin Hecht, very famous playwright back in the 60s, and that book is called Perfidy. Okay, just the English word perfidy. That book details a very famous trial that very few people know about that was held in Israel in the 1950s of a Jewish doctor that was actually convicted of having cooperated with the Nazis in rounding up his own people and shipping them off to concentration camps. And he was, and Hecht gets into his motivations for why he was involved in that activity. So those are two good places to start. But you have put your finger on one of the deepest, darkest, dirtiest secrets of the war.
Well, let's pry it open. Thanks for addressing it. I've always wondered about that. I've always wondered about the relationship between those two. Thank you.
Well, all right. I could say a whole lot more, but at this juncture, if I ever screw up the courage to write the book on that particular topic, then but I doubt I will. It's very murky, and it's very saddening when you see what's going on.
All right, thanks, Stefan, for the call. All right, let's get to a couple of flash messages. This one from Colombia, and it says, the Dr. Mengele connection. Has anyone noticed how many characteristics of alien abduction mirror Nazi genetic experiments? Lately, I have wondered if the alleged alien Nordics are actually the creations of Dr. Joseph Mengele or his disciples. Aren't they the perfect Nazi master race supermen? There is a town in Brazil called Candido Godoy,
yep,
which has a mysterious high rate of twins currently, and said to be connected to the experiments of Mengele.
Yep.
The Greys could also be a Mengele creation. fitting the Nazi slave race concept, perhaps derived in some ungodly manner from human embryos which they resemble. The Nazi program could be using the ET idea as a cover. So what do you think?
Yep. Basically, yes to all the above. This individual is absolutely correct about that town in Brazil. There has been a book by a Latin American journalist by the name of Jorge Camarasa that details that town, the high incidence of Nordic twin births there, the presence of Dr. Mengele in the area, and again, and I want to point out the hidden implication of Camarasa's thesis. In order for that type of very sophisticated genetic work to be done, you have to have in place an organization, you have to have in place finances, and you have to have in place the ability to get research equipment to do that. And again, all of this is clearly present with this Nazi International organization that I outline in the book of that name. So yes to that. Is there a peculiar incidence of Nordic types within alien abductions, and might there be a Nazi connection? Well, yes, because if you go to the very first and most famous abduction case in the 1960s, the Betty and Barney Hill case, under hypnosis, Barney Hill's psychiatrist asked him, well, what do they look like? And if you recall what I put in the SS Brotherhood of the Bell, his response is very, very odd. He says they look like Nazis. And he even, that's his exact words. So, there may be some sort of terrestrial connection to all these abduction cases. And Dr. Jacques Vallée has been arguing that point for a number of years, that they appear more to be psychological operations and human operations than anything extraterrestrial. And the final point your flash listener there says about the idea of Greys being sort of genetically engineered little robots. Well, I don't ever speculate on any of that in my books, but my suspicion has always been that this is precisely the case. So, yes to all the above.
I have said many times, and will say again because it is so true, those who listen to this show are so perceptive. We always get such great observations and great questions from our audience. All right, this one comes from Tasmania, and it's pretty long. So let me summarize it. He talks about a photograph that appears in a book called "Someone Else Is on Our Moon." And he says in this particular photograph, you can see a dome and 4 huts adjoining it. And
I know what he's talking about.
Yeah, I've got it too. So Jeff, yes, you're right, and thank you for the flash message.
Let me say one more thing about the previous flash message that I forgot to address. He mentions the fact, could all of this ET stuff be used as a Nazi cover? Mm-hmm. And to me, the answer is yes, and I'll tell you why. In most of my books, I've written 5 about this Nazi topic. I'm actually writing a 6th one right now. And in all of them, I have cited the affidavit of Carol Rosen and what she said that Werner von Braun told her. He told her, essentially, that first, the communists are going to be considered the enemies. Then it would be terrorists. Then it would be nations of concern. And then it would be asteroids, and at that point, she says, he kind of stopped and chuckled. He says, against asteroids, we are going to have to deploy weapons in space. And the final thing she says that he told him, and the most laughable of them all, in his opinion, was that we are going to have extraterrestrials, and because of that, we are going to have to deploy weapons in space. Now, the way I look at it, Kevin, is that if you take Mr. Hoagland and Mr. Barra's thesis of a hidden space program, a secret space program, in my opinion, I think they're right. And I think that 2-track space program actually began in Nazi Germany. Because after all, You've got V2 rockets raining down on London. There's your public space program. It's kind of hard to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
But your private space program, your secret off-the-books program, is all of this very advanced research the Nazis are doing into field propulsion, connected with the Bell and so on and so forth. So it's looking to me like this whole agenda began in Nazi Germany. So could this threat then be used by someone with the technology sophisticated enough to fool everybody? Absolutely.
Good enough. All right. Caller, you're live on the Kevin Smith Show. Your first name and from where are you calling?
Yeah, good evening, gentlemen. It's Terry from Ohio.
Hi, Terry.
Hi, Terry.
I got somewhat of a statement and then a question. I've mentioned before, like our forefathers, even though when they first came over here and all the good they did, they also brought what I believe is a blight on society, which is any, masonry or whatever society that's come back to bite us in the butt today, whether they knew it or what they perceived it as. It's still, ignorance is not the excuse in a court of law. And then we turn around, didn't learn nothing from that, and then we, out of greed and need, we bring these scientists over from Germany and anoint them to the top of the food chain and power, and then now we're sitting back saying, how could this happen? I mean, we did it to ourselves. Kevin really talks about NASA. Well, who was in charge of that? Why are they screwing up so much? Whether they still have power of NASA, I don't know, but, initially they had grips all over it. And then my question would be to you is that, even you said that it wasn't a treaty of surrender wasn't really properly signed, but yet is it still valid today, and is it only valid in Germany, or could we apply it to anyone in our country that's acting the same way against that treaty?
That's an excellent question. The question of the German surrenders is, if you look at the actual documents that I have in the Nazi International, there is a codicil in both of them that those surrender terms would be set aside by any surrender terms, general surrender terms, that were to be negotiated at a later date, okay? Now, I have looked and looked and looked for those general negotiated surrender terms, and I cannot find any. It is possible that the treaties that were signed between West Germany and the three Western Allied powers that granted West Germany sovereignty are to be taken in the sense of those negotiated surrender terms. But to my knowledge, under international law, there's nothing that specifically states that. Now, as regards to what the internal implications of that may be in terms of these Nazi paperclip scientists in this country, that's another good question. And I haven't found anything in my searches to indicate that there was ever any provision made for these scientists under international law. This was all done not even under U.S. law. It was done very covertly and oftentimes in complete violation of the policies that President Truman established for bringing these people over here, because you are dealing with so many sanitized records of their Nazi past. It's not even funny. So another excellent question. I have to commend you.
Okay, thanks for the question, Terry. We've got a break coming up. Does that do it for you, or you want to hang on through the break?
Oh, yeah, I'll hang on, because I got one just real quick thing. All
right. We'll be back, folks, right after this, so don't go away. Welcome back to the Kevin Smith Show. We're on final approach. We only have a few minutes left. And let me warn both of you gentlemen, both Dr. Farrell and Terry, I've got another flash message I've got to get to, so we have to kind of hurry through this. But Dr. Farrell, Terry says he's got another question for you.
Sure.
Yeah, I just find it kind of fishy, like when that we got the scientists over here and to work on the bomb. I understand that maybe we had some kind of nuclear program going on. I don't know how intense that was. But then when we got them, we pretty much went right to the bomb. And Russia took scientists too, and they seem to have got to the bomb pretty fast, whether they had a program or not. So I'm kind of wondering, wouldn't this be such a different world, if we had it and they never had it? I believe that it was given to them, to play this game that they're playing, good guy, bad guy.
Well, good point. And very briefly, let me put it to you this way. The very first book I wrote is about this Nazi stuff is a book called Reich of the Black Sun. Now, there is unfortunately a pirated version of this book on the internet. Please, if you're going to read the book, at least do me the favor of buying it. But in the book, I outline the fact that the Nazi program, first of all, was far more successful than we have been told. And in Nazi International, I lay out a scenario that was actually proposed by another American researcher by the name of Carter Heydrich, a superb researcher, wrote a book called Critical Mass. It's definitely worth reading. But in the scenario that he lays out, Bormann saw to it that during the process of surrender, we were given atom bomb components by the Nazis that actually helped make the Manhattan Project successful. Now, I am not arguing that our program would not have been successful on its own, but it would have been much later, okay? So, yes, I think your instincts there are dead on.
All right, flash message here from Patrick in Australia says, "Good day, Kevin. Very interesting topic. Strangely, we had dead air for about 30 seconds when Dr. Farrell mentioned the Deutsche Bank. My question, I'm not surprised about that. We get interfered with all the time. My question is, and let me just say, if what is being said on this show isn't true, they would never touch us.
Right.
My question is, if it was or is common knowledge that the Nazis had moved to South America, why didn't the Allies go after them there?
Well, another excellent question, and there are several answers to it. The first is that the big compound in Argentina was, first of all, under the protection of the Argentinian government, and it has been for some time. The second answer is that security at that particular compound that I'm referring to was extremely intense. For us to go in there in any capacity would have caused an international incident with a country that we cannot afford to lose as an ally, all right? That especially at that time. The other answer is that you must remember that there is also heavy Nazi penetration into the American military-industrial complex, and in particular through the CIA with this Gehlen organization. And as a matter of fact, if you look, this is the other astonishing thing that you have to remember. If you look at all those 50s CIA covert operations, the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran, the overthrow of King Farouk in Egypt and the installation of Gamal Abdel Nasser, the overthrow of Salvador Allende in Chile, in each and every instance of those covert operations, the actual feet on the ground that are carrying out all of these CIA operations are members of this Nazi International. So in other words, they've got blackmail goods on us, all right? So it's kind of a classic Mexican standoff situation. You don't cut off the covert arm that is carrying out all these operations, because essentially you won't have an arm to carry out covert operations.
All right, now I've got another question that dovetails with that one. We know about these compounds in Argentina.
Right.
What other countries are they known to have set up compounds in South America?
Inside Chile, Bolivia, Paraguay, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia. All right. You will find, and even Mexico to a certain extent, you'll find little mail drops and so on. But there's more countries involved: Taiwan, Egypt, Syria. So in other words, this is and certainly Spain. This is an extensive organization.
With all the stuff that you've written about them and that you say about them on the air, have you ever been concerned that they would come after you?
Yes and no. To be honest with you, Kevin, I was contacted by what I believe to be an intermediary for some of these people. And to my surprise, I was informed that they actually like my work, okay? And I suspect that the reason is that there's a certain bit of pride. They want their story to be told, quite bluntly.
Work in the dark, but it's okay if you know about us.
Yeah, you know, one of my biggest surprises is that 2 of my books have recently been published in Germany, and they're doing quite well. And it's not, of course, that I'm saying that the Germans are a bunch of Nazis. In fact, if you want to find a very anti-Nazi population in the world, it's in modern Germany. So, you know, I think it's a certain amount of wanting the story to be told as well.
I'll give you a quick example, because we're almost out of time, how anti-Nazi Germany is. One of the all-time most famous computer games, it's an old one, but it went everywhere. In its day, it was the bomb, was called Wolfenstein.
Oh, yes, I remember it.
It was not allowed in Germany.
That's right.
Not allowed.
That's right.
Dr. Farrell, where can people go to get your books?
Well, most of them are published by Adventures Unlimited Press, and they have a website, www.adventuresunlimitedpress, all lowercase, all one word. There is a toll-free number that they can call during normal business hours. That's 1-800-718-4514. One of my books that does deal with the Nazis is called The Philosopher's Stone, and that is available from Farrell House, F-E-R-A-L. And, of course, they can get all of my books at Amazon.
All right. Now, do you maintain a website of your own, or do you pretty much stick with your publisher's websites?
No, I do have a website of my own. I'm so pressed for time I don't update it very often, but I do have one. It's www.Giza Death Star, that's all one word, G-I-Z-A, and then the words Death Star, all lowercase, .com. And, you know, any Google search on my name will also bring up my website. And
all right, we've got 30 seconds for this answer, and then we're going to be staring at the wall here. And here's the question. This Nazi International and all their space stuff they're doing, are they going to kick off some kind of cosmic war again?
In my opinion, they probably have already started. I think that we're looking at that group that's behind all this strange stuff going on upstairs.
Are they on the moon?
It wouldn't surprise me.
Okay. I want to thank you for being with us. As always, it is fascinating when you're with us, and I definitely hope you will come back. I'm sorry?
Yeah. Thank you for having me back on.
Oh, well. We'll love to have you on anytime you want to be here. Just stay on the line with me for a moment, if you will. All right, folks, that's it. That's a wrap. That's the end of the show. My friends call me Steel Eye. My enemies do too. You can call me whatever you want. Just keep coming back again and again and again. Until next time, so long, everybody.